Welcome to today's edition of Your Questions Answered with Father Gruner. I'm John Veneri, and we take your questions and try to answer them concerning Fatima, concerning the faith, concerning the sacraments, anything that regards to our Lord and the things pertaining to God and Catholicism. And also send us your questions and your comments at the email you see on your screen now, questions@thefatimacenter.com. And we have a question that many people ask, and that is, but this was one that somebody sent us, with everything so confused in our religion, as it is in today, the chaos and the confusion that we live through in the church, how are we supposed to know what we are doing is right and wrong? How do we know the right path?
Well, first of all, we know a lot of people may be confused. It's because they don't know their faith as well as they should. First of all, we know the faith, and what is right or wrong depends on the truth of what we know. So we have to first of all go to what the church has taught, what Christ has taught, is we must believe. So we must believe the Apostles' Creed. There are 12 articles of the Apostles' Creed. We must believe those things. Okay. Once we know that, and among other things, we must believe then that we need grace to be good, and we need the sacraments to receive grace. So sacraments have different. Sacraments are religious rituals instituted by Christ to give grace, and so the purpose of baptism is to wash us. So the first thing we have to do is be baptized. So the second thing is we need to receive Holy Communion. Unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man, you cannot go to heaven. Third thing is must go to confession. If you commit a mortal sin, you should go to confession once a month at least, if not once a week, to get rid of your venial sins. So the confusion is, when it comes down to a specific, is what does the church teach? When I say, well, and the question say, well, Father so and so says this, and Father X says this, Father Y says that, and so the answer is, what has the church always taught? So whatever the church has always taught, because the first nature of truth is that it can't contradict it. If it's true in the first century that I must be baptized, it was first true in the first century that I must confess Christ even if I'm going to be killed, then it's still true today. So if God says you need to be baptized in order to be, he who preaches the gospel to all creatures, he who is baptized shall be saved. He who is not baptized will be condemned. So obviously, if our Lord says you have to receive the Holy Communion, obviously in the state of grace, then you must do that. So we have the Bible that tells us that. We have the church which puts it into a catechism. And so you say, which catechism? Well, the catechism the church has always taught. So you can take the old Baltimore Catechism, from the last century, and there was no fault in the original Baltimore Catechism, and it's put in questions and answers in bite sizes for children, for older children, and for even older children. So if you find something which is taught in the church, has always taught, and what you're learning doesn't contradict what you've always taught, then you're on safe ground. But if it's contradictory or not sure, you ask, and you can ask a priest. But the priest says, well, Father Smith says this, but I disagree with him. Well, or Father Jones says that. The point I'm getting at is that you can bring it back to the first principles, and you can always say this is the right thing to do, because it's what the faith teaches. Is we know that the saints have taught. We know that the catechisms that have been approved have taught, and what the church has defined in its councils. That's how we know.
Yes, it's a very helpful to know. People talk about tradition. What is tradition? And Saint Vincent of Lawrence in the 4th century kind of gave us a formula that was repeated in the 19th century by Vatican I, and the same formula repeated in the Oath Against Modernism. And that is that we have to adhere to the faith taught in the same meaning and in the same explanation of what the church always taught throughout the centuries. That line, in the same meaning and in the same explanation, we see it in the 4th century with St. Vincent of Lawrence, 19th century in a dogmatic definition, and the 20th century in the Oath Against Modernism.
Yes.
And so today there's the idea that, well, what the church taught in the 19th century has to give way to what the church taught for the church of the 20th and 21st century. And this is a modernist notion that's contrary to the nature of truth itself, yes, and to tradition.
And to the nature of reason. So in fact, and when we use the word modernism, of course, we're talking about modernism as a heresy, as distinct from, say, modernism in art or something else. So to say that if Christ came, and he did, and he died on the cross to give witness to the truth, and if he died on the cross to affirm his doctrine, then why would he bother dying on the cross if the truth kept on changing? And why could we call it true if it kept on changing? It has to be the same. Human nature is not changed. So it's wrong to steal, for example. Now, if you're dying of hunger, it's not stealing. You have a right to that piece of food because you need it instead of dying. But normally, if you can't take somebody else's possessions just because you like them, you want to take them. So you have the Ten Commandments that tell you what you can do and what you can't do. You have the you have to honor your father and mother. I mean, that means not only do you obey them, but you give them respect and so forth. And that's a law for all time. I mean, it came down. It was explained on Mount Sinai, given on Mount Sinai, but it even precedes Mount Sinai. It's the law written in our heart, as St. Paul says, that we know these things just from our conscience. If we haven't had some quote-unquote expert telling us, oh, well, that's all wrong, you change that now, it's all, no, it's still, the Ten Commandments are not old-fashioned, they're for all time.
So, I mean, so simply we maintain what the church always taught, even if, as St. Vincent Lawrence says, even if the entire church, men of the church would go the wrong way.
That doesn't change the truth of the...
No, and he said, too, he says that we maintain our stability by holding to tradition,
Yes.
which can, and this is his words, which can no longer be led astray by any lying novelty.
Yes.
So with that, we'll close this session, and we will see you next time.